Hi guys, this is Paul with Tweaktown. We're back here at Flash Memory Summit 2014. We're sitting down with one of the smartest guys in the industry, is Jim Handy. He's with Objective Analysis. Jim, could you tell us a little bit about Objective Analysis and what you guys do?
Yeah, thanks Paul for the compliment, but I think that it's probably ill-suited.
So he's smart.
Objective Analysis is a semiconductor market research firm. It's actually three people who used to work for Gartner DataQuest working together. We're covering memory chips and microcontrollers. We do a lot of strategic analysis for our clients. We help out with understanding about what the market trends are and where they're headed, and for both buyers and sellers of semiconductors, as well as some upstream and downstream products, we help them out to understand when they should expect growth to happen, when they should expect for the market to shrink, or in the case of semiconductors, often it's an outright collapse, and what to do to plan for those.
And so you've been in this industry a long time, so you're as close to it as anybody can possibly get. What do you think right now is growing, and what are those growth segments that you see right now that are really successful?
Well, Paul, the thing that we see going on right now is something that happens very often in semiconductors, is that we're going into a shortage, and there has been kind of a supply-demand balance for about the past 2 years almost, since the late 2012, where prices for memory chips have been relatively flat. What that means is that as long as you have normal growth in the market, then you end up with very strong growth both in the revenues for the market but also in profits. Those profits unfortunately get reinvested in new capacity, and it turns into an oversupply a couple of years later. However, something very interesting is happening now, and we're going to be talking about it pretty soon. 3D NAND, that has the possibility of being a difficult enough technology that it's going to extend this cycle. And so even though I have no doubts whatsoever that there will be a collapse in the semiconductor market at some point, it's a lot harder to tell when it's going to be this time around than next. It might not be until like 2017, 2018.
Wow. So with this oversupply that we're about to enter, over the course of this year, we've seen a lot of consolidation, and I think the guys with the real pertinent IP, pretty much all of them have been, they've been acquired and moved in consolidation. How do you think that this feels or this NAND shortage fares for some of the smaller guys who are just repackaging? They're buying some NAND, they're buying a controller. I mean, we'll probably see that pool shrink in another shortage, right?
Yeah. You could have every mom and pop working in the kitchen and putting together USB flash drives, and those companies are the ones that are going to be hardest hit during a shortage, because what typically happens is the manufacturers look at their customer base and they say, okay, this is a big, wonderful customer. We want to do more and more business with them. And Apple is like the extreme example of a customer that. And so Apple says, my goodness, we're selling more iPhones than we thought we would. Could you give us more NAND flash? And these NAND flash manufacturers will look around and they'll say, well, Joe Blow doesn't pay his bills on time, and this company has up and down volumes that I don't really like very much, so why don't we just take product from them and give it to Apple, give these guys the bad news, and if they go belly up, nobody will miss them anyway.
Yeah, could get ugly here soon in the SSD market. Now, with the future of hard disk drives and SSDs, some people are saying that SSDs will replace hard disk drives. I don't really see it. How do you feel that this looming NAND shortage is going to affect that SSD competition with hard disk drives?
It's not really a competition, and I look at it several different ways. The NAND has served very well and is becoming well understood as a layer between DRAM and hard disk drives. And this is something that's not as clear in the PC as it is in like servers and big enterprise data centers, where they'll be able to manage all of this memory kind of stuff. There was a little bit of that in the Ultrabook with that extra little SSD that went into the Ultrabook to speed it up. Yeah, exactly, caching. And that is something that is going to be a part of future computer architecture. But as far as solid state drives replacing hard drives, I don't ever see that happening, because both of them are dropping in price at roughly the same rate. And there's this 10-to-1 to 20-to-1 price difference between a hard drive and a solid state drive of the same capacity. And it's likely to stay in place for a number of years.
Yeah, and I think from a capacity standpoint in that market, I know SSDs can't take over hard disk drives, but I know they have been putting a lot of pain on the 10K and 15K hard disk drive sector because of their performance. Do you see that continuing, or do you see hard disk drive manufacturers almost retreating into capacity applications?
Yeah, actually, I agree with that they will be retreating into capacity applications. And this is a difficult time for hard disk drive manufacturers because of the fact that the whole reason why there were 10K and 15K hard drives was to speed up the access from the hard drive into the DRAM. And now that you've got SSDs that are significantly faster than the 10 or 15K hard drives, then instead of having a 7K or a 5K hard drive followed by a 10 to 15K hard drive followed by DRAM, now you've replaced that 10 to 15K hard drive area with an SSD, and you're getting better performance, maybe at a better price.
That's excellent. I kind of agree with that. I mean, I definitely agree with that. Now, in the future, we're looking at some future technologies, and one thing I noticed here, especially down on the floor, people coming up and talking to us, I'm seeing a lot of NVDIMM applications, a lot more of these new ways of thinking of what's next beyond NAND. But there's so many competing solutions right now. You have some are sliding in memory slots, some are going in PCIe, some are using different approaches. Which ones do you think will shake out over time?
Well, there are actually two things that you talked about there, the NVDIMM, and there are a couple of different approaches to that, and then the after NAND technologies. NVDIMM is, the two ways of doing an NVDIMM is, one is to have a DRAM DIMM and then add some NAND flash backup. That pushes up the cost of the DRAM. And what that means is that it's only going to appeal to certain people who want to pay extra for the fact that when there's a power failure, that their data is going to be retained inside the NAND flash, and that they'll be able to come up without disk accesses and run as if nothing ever happened. Those are a more expensive solution, and so they're wonderful for applications like the one that I like is in casinos, where let's say everybody's on their one-armed bandits and playing their little card machines and everything. Lights go out, lights come back on again. Is it all going to reset, and are people going to lose the amount of money that they won?
Definitely.
Yeah, and so the casinos are really interested in this technology, and so are banks. You don't want to be in the middle of an ATM transaction and have the thing forget where it was because there was power failure. And so it goes down, it comes back up again, and it says, we were in the middle of something, I know what it was, and I'm going to complete your transaction. And so that's where those, and where you can charge top dollar for something like that. The other DIMM technology is actually putting flash on and making it masquerade as a DRAM on the DIMM. And there's a lot of interest in that technology. IBM actually is very much behind that.
Their X series.
Yeah,
they actually have some
X-Flash
DIMMs.
DIMMs. Yeah. And what you can do with that, and we ran a study, one of the things that Objective Analysis did was a study on what happens when you put varying amounts of NAND flash and varying amounts of DRAM into a PC. And we found out that dollar for dollar, after you got past about a gigabyte in the PC, that if you put in NAND flash, you got more bang for the buck.
Oh yeah.
And that's probably true of higher end systems too. We just were cheap when we did these benchmarks. So anyway, what computing is going to find out is that they're probably going to start, people are going to start doing this thing with the Ultra DIMMs from SanDisk or the X-Flash DIMM from IBM, where people are going to say, okay, we're only going to populate our servers with whatever, 32 gigabytes of DRAM instead of 96, and then we're going to put in a whole gob of NAND flash, whatever, 8 slots with 400 gigabytes per slot or whatever of NAND flash, and they're going to get a lot more performance at lower power and a lower cost. So I'm expecting there to be a big move in that direction in the future.
That is good.
Now, you also asked about post-flash technology,
yes,
so I'm not going to let you take over the floor.
Yes.
And flash is actually going through transitions that might not be visible to the user, and I like to say that nothing is really going to be visible to the real end user. I'm going to have an iPhone in a couple of years that's got a terabyte of memory in it, and I'm going to get rid of it and get an iPhone that's got 2 terabytes or 4 terabytes of memory in it. And when I do that, I'm not going to have a clue what chips are used inside this.
Absolutely, it's going to be blacktop NAND almost.
Yeah. And so the question is then, what steps are we going to get to go there? And we've already made a step that nobody's aware of, and that is going to high K gate dielectric in just the regular what's called planar NAND, the stuff that has been shipping for years and years. After that, We're going to go to a 3D NAND technology, and we can talk more about that in the future. And then after 3D NAND has petered out, then there are all of these technologies that are vying to be the next technology that'll take it over. But it all happens on cost. And these technologies right now cost more than NAND flash. And until NAND flash stops reducing cost, then it's not going to be taken over. And so I'm saying that's going to happen in 2023.
Yeah.
There's a lot of time between now and then. People ask me which technology is going to win that war, and I say, I can't tell what's going to happen that far out in the future. A dark horse candidate could come up and take over, you know, what looks like a battle that can be won today by ReRAM or by MRAM. It could be carbon nanotubes take over in that.
Yeah, that's exciting technology. And you know, from my perspective, I think that people say, what's the thing that's going to replace RAM, or NAND, excuse me. I don't really believe personally that anything will replace NAND. I think that next technology, just like SSDs haven't replaced hard disk drives, and won't. Yeah. The next may not, and probably will not replace NAND. There will still be applications.
Yeah. No, I expect it to, yeah, because I expect the cost to go down. And you know, if somebody is going to be confronted. Right now, we've got, you know, around 35 cents per gigabyte NAND flash.
Yeah.
And so by the time that this happens, let's say that it's 35 cents per terabyte. You know, that's very likely to happen. And so all of a sudden, this new technology comes in, and it's 10 cents per terabyte.
Yeah.
Then everybody is just going to completely turn their back on NAND flash, and they're going to go after this 10 cents per terabyte, whatever alternative technology it is.
I guess you're right. I mean, pricing is, of course, always the key. And one thing that's came about lately is, of course, in the quest for lower pricing with NAND is 3D NAND, and there's probably nobody who has their finger on the pulse of 3D NAND better than you. Jim has an amazing series of 3D NAND articles where he explains literally every facet of it, and it's become a Bible for the guys. Everybody's reading it if they have questions. So can you give us a feel of what you think is going on with 3D NAND, and not just from now where we're at?
Yeah.
Let's talk about also where it's going to go.
Okay, well first let me tell where that series is, and it's on a blog that I write that's called The Memory Guy. It's really easy. You just run together the words thememoryguy.com and you'll find it there.
It's a great resource, especially for us guys in the media. Everybody reads it.
Yeah, something that I try to do is I try to take things that are really arcane, bizarre, mind-bending concepts and turn them into something that people can understand.
And 3D NAND is mind-bending.
Oh, yeah, 3D NAND, and it's incredibly difficult too. And so, like I was teaching a course here at the Flash Memory Summit on that just recently, and you know, I said, okay, one thing that they do with this is they have this hole that they have to etch. That's a 60:1 aspect ratio, and it doesn't really sound like something that you can really wrap your head around until you think, okay, it's if you were to take a 1/4-inch dowel, you know, something the size of a pencil, and make it 15 inches long, that would be your 60:1 aspect ratio.
Wow.
So they're drilling holes like that through a layer cake, which has got like 32 layers of cake plus 32 layers of frosting in between. So let's assume that you've drilled that hole in there. Then that ends up replacing actually some of the things that you do side by side in a regular NAND flash. You're just taking that, you're turning it on its side and saying all these side by side things are now represented by the layers, but we have to get to all of the layers, and so we drill this incredibly deep, narrow hole. Now your job is to paint 3 layers of different materials on the walls of that hole.
Yeah, that's not going to be easy.
You know, let's say you prime it first, and then you put on anti-rust coating, and then you put on whatever the final color is that you want. They've got to do that to make it. And you know, that gets them to a certain point, and then they've got to do this very elaborate way of cutting a stair step so that they can make an electrical connection to each cake layer without missing any of them. It's a really difficult process. Samsung has, you know, I think my hat's off to Samsung.
Yeah, they pulled it off, and they've done 2 now.
Yeah, well,
they've already scaled up.
Nobody's ever seen the first one.
Yeah.
So, but the second one they are shipping, you know, and you guys have evaluated samples of that SSD.
Yeah,
it's a good SSD based on, you know, good NAND flash
performance
products.
is good.
Yeah. So you know, and so that product, you know, they're going to be moving with, but because of the fact that it uses a lot of techniques that have never been used before in semiconductors, and because of the fact that I've seen the semiconductor market brought to its knees by what seem like relatively small issues, I'm expecting there to be a very bumpy road in the actual replacement where 3D NAND replaces planar NAND. I expect it to happen, but I don't expect it to happen really soon. And I'm saying maybe 2017 is when 3D really gives planar a run for its money.
Yeah, we've also had some 16 nanometer planar products in, and they are surprisingly good.
Yeah.
So, you know, they're really good, and I think from a cost-effective basis, you know, from producing it and then selling it, I think that 16 nanometer, it's a lot of people think it's a more viable product from a manufacturer standpoint.
Yeah, well, it's not as big of a change, you know, and when you don't change what you're doing very much, then it's a whole lot easier than when you change absolutely everything in the world.
Like
you know,
3D NAND.
Yeah, the guys who make the equipment, because, you know, we talked to them, the guys who make the equipment for fabs, they basically make out that, you know, moving from planar NAND to 3D NAND is kind of like if you take an automobile factory and you change over to making washing machines. You know, they're both mechanical, they both use bent steel and motors and stuff like that, but there is so little in common that you're not going to really be using an awful lot of the same equipment. And so, you know, for example, Applied Materials uses a term that's common in the industry. It's called a greenfield fab. And what that is when you start out with an empty lot and you build a building and you make a new fab, and they've started applying that term to taking an old fab that was making planar NAND and turning it into a 3D fab, because basically their position is you empty everything out of the fab and you put in all new equipment.
Just got to knock it down.
Yeah.
Well, it's exciting times, and you know, we appreciate you stopping by. There isn't a single time I talk to Jim that I don't learn something. I always learn a lot more than one thing at a time.
Oh, thanks, Paul. You guys are a great resource too. So thanks a lot.
We appreciate your time. Thanks.